Greetings, one and all, to the most cursed, most cringiest corner of the internet. A YouTube channel, content creator actively alienating everyone in both the analog and digital world. Well, welcome and good evening, you wonderful dice of all alignments. I am Lunar D8. We are reading The Tragedy of X, Ellery Queen, Act 3, Scene 1, A Suite at the Ritz, Friday, October 9th, 9 p.m. Mr. Drury Lane studied the face of his host, unobserved. DeWitt stood in a group of his friends, smiling and chattering, making crackling retorts to friendly jibes, and Mr. Drury Lane glowed with the warm internal satisfaction of the scientist who probes and probes, and finds what he is seeking. For John DeWitt illustrated a character lesson of provocative outline. Within the space of 6 hours he had changed from a man enveloped in obdurate armor to a man stripped of sorrow, alive, flashing, a wit, an intellectual companion, an amiable host. From the moment that the foreman of the jury, a gulping old man, had waggled his lantern jaws, and ground out the swift release, the sesame of not guilty that swung open the gates of imprisonment, DeWitt, with a surge of his thin chest, had cast off the armor of his silence. A retiring man? Not tonight, for tonight there must be celebration, laughter, the chink of glasses, the banquet of deliverance. The party had congregated in a private suite of the Ritz. In one room, a long table loaded with crockery, stemware, and flowers had been set up. Jean DeWitt was there, sparkling and rosy, Christopher Lord and Franklin Ahere looming over the frail body of his friend, and Louis Imperial, the immaculate, and Lyman and Brooks, and by himself, Drury Lane. DeWitt murmured an apology and slipped out of the chatting group. In a corner the two men faced each other, DeWitt alertly humble, Lane, pleasant and non-committal. Mr. Lane, I haven't had the opportunity. I can't find words to express my profound thanks. Lane chuckled. I see that even lawyers as hardened as Lyman cannot resist impulsive indiscretion. Won't you sit down? Yes, Frederick Lyman told me. Mr. Lane, he could not accept congratulations, he said, which rightfully belonged to you. That was a remarkable alignment of facts, Mr. Lane, remarkable. DeWitt's sharp eyes fluttered, yet perfectly obvious. Not so obvious, sir, DeWitt sighed happily. You can't know how honored I am by your presence. I know how little you care for this sort of thing, how few public appearances you make. True, smiled Lane, but after all, beside the point. Mr. DeWitt, you see, I am here. I'm afraid, however, that my presence is not entirely induced by the pleasant company and the earnestness of your invitation. Something dark flitted over DeWitt's face and was gone in the next instant. For you see, it occurred to me that you might have something. Lane's voice became a shadow of its usual robustness. Something to tell me. DeWitt did not answer at once. He looked about, drinking in the sounds of gaiety, the supple beauty of his daughter, the quiet laughter of Ahern across the room. An attendant in evening clothes was opening the sliding doors of the banquet room. DeWitt turned back, and his hand crept to his eyes. He pressed the lids down, remained in an attitude of thought, of calculation. Well, sir, you're uncanny. He opened his eyes to look directly into the grave face of the actor. I've made up my mind to trust you, Mr. Lane. Yes, it's the only way. An iron note pealed. It's true. I have something to tell you. Yes, but I can't say anything now, the broker shook his head firmly. Not now. It's a long, sordid story, and I don't want to spoil your evening or my own. His gayish hands twitched. Tonight, well, it's a special sort of night for me. I've escaped a horrible thing. Jean, my daughter, and Lane nodded slowly. Behind the mirror of DeWitt's abstracted eyes, there was a vision, he was sure, not of Jean DeWitt, but of Fern DeWitt, Grief, perhaps. DeWitt's wife was not present, and knowing what he knew, Lane felt certain that in his quiet, uncomplaining way, DeWitt still loved the woman who had betrayed him. DeWitt slowly rose. "Won't you come down with the rest of my party tonight, sir? We're all going out to my place in West Inglewood. I've arranged a little celebration. If you don't care to stay for the weekend, I'll make any further arrangements you may please to command." "One night? Well, certainly not. Brooks is staying the night, and we can accommodate you as well as him with linen," he added in quite another tone. "Tomorrow morning we can have to ourselves, and then I will tell you what, by some magical quality of intuition, you expected me to tell you tonight." Lane got to his feet and placed his hand lightly on the small man's shoulder. "I quite understand. Forget everything until tomorrow morning." "There's always a tomorrow morning, isn't there?" murmured DeWitt. They moved forward to join the others. A soft sickness attacked the pit of Lane's stomach. Banalities. He found himself bored all at once. His face smiled at the group, and while the attendant evening clothes invited the party to enter the banquet room, a pinpoint glowed in a chamber of his brain, and he found himself thinking tomorrow, and tomorrow, and tomorrow, to the last syllable of recorded time. It sheened and trembled, vibrated clearly in his head, to dusty death. He sighed, found Lyman's arms entwined in his, smiled, and followed the others to the feast. The party was gay. Apologetically, Ahearn ordered a special platter of cooked vegetables, but he had sipped some Tokay and was recounting the details of a strenuous chess match to Imperial, who, frankly inattentive, preferring to murmur polished conceits to Jean DeWitt across the table. Lionel Brooks' blond head rolled with the lilt of a soft tune being played by a string orchestra, concealed behind palms in a corner of the room. Christopher Lord discussed the prospects of the Harvard 11, one eye cocked at Jean at his side. DeWitt sat quietly enjoying the hum of conversation. The song of the violins, the room, the table, the food, the warmth, and Drury Lane studied him and watched him, and made an occasional jest with Lyman, flushed with wine, urged him into speech. Over demi-tasse and cigarettes, Lyman suddenly rose, clapping his hands for silence. He raised a glass. "As a rule," he said, "I despise the institution of toast. It's an archaic hangover from the day of bustles, crinolines, and stage-door jonies. But there's a good excuse for toasting tonight, toasting a man's deliverance." He grinned down at DeWitt. "The best of health, the best of luck, John DeWitt." They drank. DeWitt struggled to his feet. His voice broke. Drury Lane smiled, but the sickness deepened in his stomach. "Like Fred, I'm a shy man. For no reason at all they left. But I propose to give you one of us who, for decades, has been the idol of millions of intelligent people, who has faced countless audiences, and yet who I think is the shyest of us all, Mr. Drury Lane." They drank again, and Lane smiled again and wished he were very far away. He did not rise, said in his thrilling baritone, "I have the profoundest admiration for people who can carry these things off easily. On the stage one learns self-possession, but I have never mastered the art of perfect equanimity in affairs like this." "Let's have it, Mr. Lane," shouted Ahearn. "I see I must." He rose, and his eyes twinkled out of their boredom. "I suppose I should preach a sermon. And since my stock in trade is not the abstract, but the actor's script, my sermon must of necessity be couched in dramatic terms." He turned directly to DeWitt, sitting silent and alert at his side, and said, "Mr. DeWitt, you have just passed through one of the most harrowing experiences possible to emotional man, to sit before the bar, waiting through interminable years for a verdict, only too humanly fallible, which will mean life or death. It is surely society's most subtle punishment to endure such an eternity with dignity merits you the highest praise." I was reminded of the half-humorous, half-tragic remark of the French publicist Sieyès when he was asked what he had done during the Reign of Terror. He simply said, "I don't know how to pronounce French." Jaiviku, which means I have survived. A retort impossible to any but a man of spirit and philosophy. The actor breathed deeply and regarded the company with unmoving features. There is no virtue greater than the virtue of courage, as executed by perseverance. The very triteness of the thought is its guarantee of truth. They were quite still, but DeWitt was the most motionless of all. He seemed to feel the tide of rich words enter his body and become part of him. He seemed to feel that the words were directed wholly and meaningly and comfortingly to him alone. Drury Lane tossed his head and said, "Please bear with me if, since you have insisted on my prattling, I bring a somber note into this gay company by leaning on my inevitable reference for all the wisdom that has ever been uttered." His voice lilted, grew stronger in one of Shakespeare's not sufficiently appreciated dramas. King Richard III appears a commentary on the better side of a dark soul, which, it seems to me, is confounding in its penetration. He cocked a slow eye at DeWitt's bowed head. "Mr. DeWitt," he said, "your experience of the past few weeks has fortunately stripped suspicion of murder from your name. Yet this does not clarify a greater issue, for somewhere about us, lurking in the mists, is a murderer who has already dispatched 2 human beings into hell, or, for their sakes, I hope, heaven. How many of us have reflected on the character of this man-killer, the machinery of his soul? For even if the observation be trite, he has a soul, and if we are to believe our spiritual guides, an immortal one, too. Too many of us think of a murderer as an inhuman monster without recalling that buried in the depths of ourselves are raw emotional spots which the lightest touch might convert into just such festering foments to manslaughter. There was such silence as to make the atmosphere thick, ponderable. Lane continued evenly, whereupon we returned to Shakespeare's observation on one of his most interesting dramatic characters, the misshapen, bloody King Richard, surely an ogre in human form, if there ever was one. Yet what does the all-seeing eye observe? In Richard's own bitter words, and suddenly he altered his bearing, his expression, his voice. It was done so suddenly, so unexpectedly, that they stared at him almost with fear. Cunning, acerbity, ravaging, viciousness, supreme and aged disappointment obscured the pleasant face with sinister lines and shadows. Mr. Drury Lane was quite swallowed up in a new and terrible personality. His mouth writhed open, and strangled sounds issued from the golden orifice. "Give me another horse. Bind up my wounds. Have mercy, Jesu." The voice rose to a pitiful snarl, torn from an anguished throat. It fell flatly, without emotion, without despair, almost without sound. Soft. I did but dream. They were bewitched, taken out of themselves, in a transport of fascination. The voice went on, muttering but clear, "O coward conscience, how dost thou afflict me? The lights burn blue. It is now dead midnight. Cold, fearful drops stand on my trembling flesh. What do I fear? Myself? There's none else by. Richard loves Richard, that is. I am I. Is there a murderer here? No. Yes, I am. Then fly. What? From myself? Great reason why. Lest I revenge. What? Myself upon myself? Alack, I love myself. Wherefore? For any good that I myself have done unto myself? Oh, no. Alas, I rather hate myself, for hateful deeds committed by myself. I am a villain, yet I lie. I am not. Fool, of thyself speak well. Fool, do not flatter. The voice tottered on the brink of something foul, caught itself, surged on, in a paean of tragic self-mortification. My conscience hath 1,000 several tongues, and every tongue brings in a several tale. And every tale condemns me for a villain. Perjury, perjury in the highest degree, all several sins, all used in each degree, thronged to the bar, crying, guilty, guilty, I shall despair. There is no creature loves me, and if I die, no soul shall pity me. Nay, wherefore should they, since that I myself find in myself no pity to myself? Someone sighed. Scene 2. Weehawken Railway Station, Friday, October 9, 11:55 p.m. 11:55 p.m., 5 minutes to midnight. At a few minutes before midnight, the DeWitt party entered the West Shore Railroad terminus, and Weehawken, the barn-like gray waiting room, with the naked iron trusses lacing its ceiling, the platform running overhead besides the walls. There were a few people about in a corner near one of the doors to the yard. A clerk at the baggage room counter drowsed. A man yawned behind the magazine stand. The long-backed benches were empty. They entered in a gust of laughter, a party intact except for Frederick Lyman, who had excused himself at the hotel and returned to his apartment. Jean DeWitt and Lord ran to the magazine stand, Imperial at their heels, smiling, and Lord purchased a huge box of candy, offering it to Jean. With an exaggerated bow, Imperial, not to be outdone in gallantry, purchased an armful of magazines and, clicking his heels together, presented them to the girl. Rosie, bundled in furs, eyes shining, she laughed, and putting a hand under an arm of each, led them to a bench where they sat down, chattering and nibbling at chocolates. The 4 remaining members of the party strolled to the ticket window. DeWitt looked up at the big clock above the magazine stand. Its hands stood at 12:04. Well, he said cheerfully, our train doesn't leave until 12:13. We have a few minutes, excuse me. They had stopped at the window. Lane and Brooks dropped back a step, and Ahern grasped DeWitt's arm. Here, John, let me. DeWitt chuckled, threw Ahern's arm off, and said to the clerk, 6 single-trip tickets to West Englewood, please. There are 7 of us, John, protested Ahern. I know, but I have my own regular 50-trip ticket book. His face clouded as the clerk shoved 6 bits of pasteboard through the window. Then he smiled and said dryly, I suppose I should sue the state for the value of my old trip book. It expired while I was... He stopped and said abruptly, let me have a new 50-trip book, too. Name, sir? John O. DeWitt. West Englewood. Yes, Mr. DeWitt. The clerk tried not to rubber and became extremely busy. A few moments later he pushed under the grating a dated rectangular paper book. As DeWitt took out his wallet and produced a $50 bill, Jean's clear voice rang out, Daddy, the train's in. The clerk made change rapidly, and DeWitt, cramming the bills and loose change into his trousers pocket, turned about to his 3 companions, the 6 single tickets and the trip book in hand. Do we have to run for it? Asked Lionel Brooks. The 4 men faced each other. No, we have enough time, replied DeWitt, tucking the tickets and the new book into the upper left pocket of his vest, and then rebuttoning his coat. They made their way across the waiting room, joined Jean and Lord and Imperial, and went out into the chilly air of the roofed yard. The 12:13 local was in. They walked through the iron-grilled gateway and down the long concrete platform. A few other passengers were following them, straggling along. The last car was dark, and they walked ahead, boarding the second car from the end. Several strangers sat down in the same car.